Okay, I think last session we have discussed about these authorizations. If I'm not wrong, I think we have discussed about
Yes, correct, Raj.
authorization part. We have discussed with
Auth 2. Yeah.
because there are different parameters normally we will be giving, right? So we need to provide some parameters followed by the key values. So this part we have completed. After that, we discussed even about authorization, especially authorizations, basic authorizations, but
Mm-hmm.
2.0 is something generally an authorization normally we will be taken. So when there is any authorizations that we have taken, we need to identify what are the different tokens that are available when we are providing authentications for the access of data. Because normally this is for API. API is for accessing purposes. This access is majorly focusing on authentications. It's not majorly for authorization, but generally for authentications and authorizations. Majorly, authorizations are something that generally we see. So OAuth 2.0 we need to create. So that is one aspect that we discussed in the last session. So in addition to that, there must be some responses we have to provide. So this is what generally it was, right? So we need to add authorization data, right? So when we want to add authorization data to the existing application, it's important for us to identify whether the request we are taking even from URL or from the header. That is something that we have to decide on our own. So for example, we are accessing the, let's say for example, when we see our Guidewire application, we are using Billing Center, which is cloud even, and even even Team Center and as well as Policy Center were also cloud applications. When these applications are cloud, these applications are connected with URL, right? So there are some URLs that can be taken. So request of the data that can be accessed through URL is one aspect or one element that will be seen. So second, about the request of headers, whatever the request of headers that we have. So the request of headers will also be taken. So either through URL we are authorizing the data or we are taking request headers and all. For example, request URL is something we have taken because many of the projects now and then we are using through cloud application, because many applications we are transforming from legacy to the cloud. Cloud web applications like URL is something that we need to be managed with. Next, when you want to refresh, because sharing auto refreshing of tokens are important, because tokens are something which will be generated by the server. If you remember in the last session, I mentioned these points to you. So it will be up, it will be generated by the servers. So multiple tokens will be created again and again. Okay, multiple tokens will be created. So because multiple API connects generally we do, and the multiple data that will be transformed from one system to another system. When we are doing this, we need to uh, create tokens, or we need to identify the tokens whichever are available all manually, which is not something which is not something feasible, okay, which is not something possible to perform. That's the reason why, first of all, we need to auto refresh the tokens. That is important, because when there is any tokens that we have created, I mean to say, okay, when there is any kind of tokens that we have created so far, right? So whatever the tokens that we have created and all, we need to refresh the tokens. That is one of the key and important factor that we need to mention. You please note down the point. Tokens, please make a note. Madam,
Okay, Raj. Okay, Raj. Okay.
tokens. Uh, whenever we create tokens, otherwise write down. Whenever we create tokens, used to authorize API request, API request, we need to we need to refresh we need to refresh the generated tokens the generated tokens in auto mode. Generate tokens in auto mode. In auto mode. This is not only uh, useful, but also required for us to but also required for us to required for us to share the tokens when we create when we create when we create. Hence, it's important for us to it's important for us to uh, it's important for us to enable it's important for us to enable auto refreshing of tokens auto refreshing of tokens which verifies user identity to the system or any application that we create. Then write it clear. Okay.
Mhm.
So generally available tokens that are to be created, which systems generally generate. For example, we are creating a token. For example, get new access. For example, I'm just writing because this is enabled. This is an encrypted format. It will not be shown directly. For example, I'm writing getting new access. Okay, for example, right? So this is a token that we have created. Okay, so when there is any token that we have created or the system is generated, so it has to be refreshed as long as we are using the same activity again and again. Because, for example, if you want to access new tokens, this access of new tokens from the server will be a continuous activity as long as you are as long as you are accessing the data from one system to another system for any other purposes. Maybe you are accessing the data to know about the policy holders, right? So who are the policy holders? When whoever is paying the premium, right? So whoever is paying the premium renewals or any new premiums, right? So accessing of data will be always. So when there is any kind of new token that generally we have created, for example, get new token access or something. So all these things that when we created, and so once it is created, we can if you want to share, you can share the tokens also. If you want to share and save the token and all, so we need to identify the request access. That is important because once we have created this tokens, especially on the server basis that we have created, if this can be shared, that is an option where we have to see, because you need to have that token first. Without it, you have not created any token, you are not authorized to share the token. So that is essentially required in this regard. So first of all, we need to create a token here, wherein I'm mentioning, for example, get new access. Okay, this is a token I have created, for example. Okay, I have created. Now what we can do, we cannot auto refresh, because auto refreshing, when there is any activity that we are performing, it happens. Otherwise, you can share the token here. Here you can see we can enable it, and you have to share the token, and wherein we need to provide the request name. Okay, for example, user one. For example, I'm just giving the rough idea. Okay, for example, user one is the request name that we have taken. So collection name is new collection, for example. Let us assume that. Okay, so if you want to save it, you can save here. Here you can see, you can save here. Yeah, you can save, right? So access token values you have given, and you have added. So this is how generally these authorizations generally we have to create. So whenever there is any authorizations that we have created for the existing OAUTH 2.0, using OAUTH 2.0, whatever the parameters that are required and all, every parameters will be created over here. Understood? You are clear, right? Access token is one thing that I have taken. Are you following or not?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
Raj.
these parameters we need to create. If you want to create parameters, again repeating same and again and again. If you want to create parameters, first you need to go for authorization. You need to select the authorization type, as in when we discussed earlier. Authorization 2.0 I have taken here. So once authorization 2.0 I have taken, first you need to identify the authorization data from where we have taken the request. I have taken the request from the URL. This is something that we have taken. Next, we need to identify the available tokens. As of now, we don't have any available tokens. Hence, I have created an available token. And whichever the available token that I have created, that has to be shared. When we have shared, this available token information can be seen here. Access token. Do you got my point? Did you understand?
Yes, Raj. Yes.
Because if you remember here, when there is anything like access token, etc., when they have written, this will be in the encrypted format. If you want to see the actual token that you have created, you need to go to the parameters. Here you can see the key. You don't see the value also, right? So you can see the access key, and you can see the access value. That is, for that you need to share the token to the parameter, so that these parameters are something that we can use it. So this is something how generally a tokens are something we need to create. This is point number one. Point number two, when there is any kind of token name that we have taken, for example, assume that there were already the token names that we have. Okay. For example, if you want to edit the token configuration, normally when there is any configurations taken place, this option is required. Otherwise, if there is no editing of taking configuration, then we don't need actually. But if there is any editing configuration we are doing, why this configuration, I'll tell you. For example, we are in the stage of integration here. Okay, because APIs are using for integration purposes. That is what we are using now. But there are some things sometimes where even configurations, even we have to edit the configurations also, because assume that we have already configured billing center application and we are using it. Now when we start using the billing center application, where you have to make some changes on the existing configuration steps which are already created. Subsequently, based upon the configuration procedure or the steps that we have identified or modified, so based on that, you need to edit the token configurations also. Because if there is any feasibility, if there is any reason behind, then only we do it. Otherwise, we don't require. But we'll have a provision. If you want to perform it, we'll be having a provision where we can edit the token configuration. If you want to edit any token configuration, that also can be done. Means by updating the token name, right? So at the same time, you need to identify the grant type, right? So authorization code, or is it through authorization code, or is it through client credentials? because client will have a credential. If you remember in the last session, I told you, right? So for the client creations, for client credentials are holded only with the client, because when I've given introduction about OAUTH 2.0, when I've detailed you about OAUTH 2.0, I mentioned one point. If you can recollect yourself, authorizations we are giving for what purposes? Because multiple users are using application. Sometimes in reality, we cannot provide user ID password for all the customers, all the users. So what we are doing, we are creating an OAuth 2.0 over here. So, okay, but here what we are doing, you are making configurational changes. Okay, when you are making configurational changes, means you are allowing login credentials. You are allowing people to access the application only by login credentials. There is no OAuth 2.0 concept. Okay, nothing is required as such. For example, okay. So the grant type we need to select. Either it can be through an authorization code. It has to be. Authorization code was already created, right? So authorization code was created. Now assume that, for example, we want to make some changes on the authorization access types, etc. So through password credentials, for example, client credentials or any kind of password credentials that we need to select. You need to select the client credentials or password credentials that we have to be taken. That is important. So based on that, what we have to do, we need to identify the client authorization. For example, client credentials I have taken. When I'm taking client credentials and all, I need to select, right? So is it as a basic authorization header, or is only client credentials, you're sending client credentials and all? So we need to select select the client credentials, especially so that these credentials are being used to access the data. So there are any configurations which are required, any configurations which we want to make. These configurations are always important. And if you want to make any kind of configurational changes and all, so configuration changes majorly impacted on the grant type. Either it can be through authorization code, or it can be through password credentials. Major points I'm saying. There were many, but major I'm saying, or it can be through password credentials, or it can be through client credentials only. This information will be updated. Do you understand this?
Raj, yeah. Here, implicit also they mentioned, right? What is that implicit?
Implicit condition means exceptional conditions. For example, if there is any exceptional conditions we have already, automatically that exceptional conditions will be updated. Here you can see the difference. For example, we have taken client credentials. Client credentials, we don't have any client ID or something like, and at the same time we have access control URLs were there. Implicit conditions means in special conditions this will be there. So you will be having authorization URL, at the same time you will be having callback URL also. If you are taken implicit credentials. Do you understand the difference here? Clear? See, implicit conditions means for an exclusive requirement purposes, implicit grant type will be provided. Right? So if you are selecting implicit conditions, you need to identify the callback URL, and means from where you are accessing the data, where you are calling back the data, that URL should also be updated here. Callback URL also can be updated. This cannot be modified because this is comes with predefined. If it's implicit condition I am talking about. If you are selecting client credentials, then you don't require anything of that. You don't require any callback URL. Authentication URL itself is sufficient. This is the difference. Understood? Clear?
Okay.
Next, when it comes to authorization code, and authorization code with PKC is about the packages. Because along with authorization code, there are some packages which will be pre-created. Okay, predefined packages are there. So normally predefined packages we don't use. Authorization codes only we use. But if there are any changes that are to be made, we will be making changes on the authorization code itself. So that this authorization code will also have callback URLs. But whereas when there are any changes that we are making for client credentials, you don't find the details. Do you understand this? Clear? So this is how generally this authorizations we need to create. So authorization OAuth 2.0, And this is how generally the tokens that we have to take, means whatever the tokens that are available, when there is any tokens we have created, that can be created and that can be managed as a access tokens we can create and we can mention here. This is something that we need to do from the guideware testing point of view. Means if you want to perform this guideware testing, especially on Postman API, so uh, this by creating these parameters, by creating authorizations is also required. And do you is it like
Okay.
understood? Right. So this is
Yeah.
one. At the same time, after that, if you want to refresh it, you don't require, because if you want to have, for example, if you want to have new access token, if you want, you can take it. That is required. But generally, this is because these are all not full versions. They'll give you access token. Access will be for limited purposes. They don't allow to create multiple. But multiple accesses to access tokens so can also be created, depends on our application integration to which applications that we are created. Based upon that, if you want to create new access tokens, that can be created apart. So from the testing perspective, this is this authorization, how this authorizations as well as token creation is also one of the key factor. uh, Being into the guideware testing, you must be good with. Clear, madam? Understood?
Mhm.
Right? Clear or not?
Yeah, yeah.
Next, we need to know about the scripting part, followed by the settings, etc. So this part I'll be discussing tomorrow. Tomorrow is it. Tomorrow I am taking session. Tomorrow either. Tomorrow same time as we connect today. So from now onwards, we can take 7 days a week. So that let me complete as earliest as I can. Okay.
Okay, Raj.